Alice chasing a white rabbit, a magical world of madness, tea parties, talking cats, and a furious queen demanding heads. A childhood fantasy, right? Wrong. The story of Alice in Wonderland isn't just a whimsical, trippy dream. It's a journey into fear, control, and identity. And beneath the nonsense lies something far darker. This isn't just a fairy tale. It's way more real than you could possibly imagine. Beneath its playful surface lies something dark, a world shaped by madness, by the fear of losing control, and by the unsettling question, who do you become when the world around you starts to make no sense? It's time to descend down the rabbit hole inside the world of Wonderland. But remember, there's no turning back. The only way forward is through.
Curiouser and curiouser.
Off with their heads!
We're all mad here.
Before we step into Wonderland, let's meet the man who created it, Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, better known by his pen name, Lewis Carroll. Born in 1832 in Cheshire, England, Carroll was a mathematician, a logician, and a photographer. But despite his sharp mind and quiet demeanor, he's remembered for something much more creative: Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. First published in 1865, this tale of a young girl's journey through a strange and chaotic world became one of the most beloved stories of all time. The character of Alice was famously inspired by a real girl, Alice Liddell, the daughter of the Dean of Christ Church in Oxford. Carroll was close to the Liddell family and often entertained Alice and her sisters with fantastical tales during their outings. One of those stories became the foundation for Wonderland. However, Carroll's friendship with Alice has been the subject of much speculation. Historians and scholars have long debated the nature of their relationship, especially in light of missing pages from his personal diaries, pages that cover key years during his friendship with the Liddell family. If you'd like me to dive deeper into this and the lives of other famous authors like Hans Christian Andersen and Charles Dickens, let me know. But for now, let's step into the world of Wonderland. Every story has a beginning, and Alice's adventure starts with a decision. When she sees a white rabbit dressed in a waistcoat checking his pocket watch, she doesn't hesitate. She follows him. It's in that moment where her world changes forever. The white rabbit acts as a guide and a symbol of curiosity. He's the call to adventure, the first step into the unknown. The rabbit hole itself? It's a threshold, a passage from the ordinary into the extraordinary. With his waistcoat, pocket watch, and constant cries of, oh dear, I shall be late," the white rabbit is more than just a curious character. He represents time slipping through our fingers, a reminder of the pressures and anxieties we place on ourselves. But what is he really running from, or to? And why does he seem so afraid of time? In Victorian society, punctuality and structure ruled everything, especially for those serving under powerful figures. The white rabbit could be seen as a servant to time itself racing, not because he wants to, but because he's afraid of the consequences of stopping. The faster he runs, the more lost he becomes. He isn't just late. He's trapped in a cycle of fear, always moving, but never free. In Wonderland, the white rabbit is an important character. He shows us how easily we can become prisoners to time, chasing something that always seems just out of reach. But sometimes, the faster we run, the farther away we end up. In Wonderland, it's never about where you're going. It's about who you become while you're trying to get there. In Wonderland, everyone has something to say, but few have as much impact as the caterpillar. Perched on a mushroom and surrounded by the hazy tendrils of his smoke, he seems like just another strange inhabitant of Wonderland. But then he asks Alice a question that stops her in her tracks. Who are you? Forcing Alice to confront something terrifying. The idea that she doesn't even know who she is anymore. It's her sense of self that feels unsteady. The caterpillar's question is simple, but Alice has no answer. Because in Wonderland, identity is slippery. It changes, twists, and slips through your fingers. This isn't just a question for Alice, it's a question for anyone who's ever felt themselves change in ways they didn't understand. Alice's constant growing and shrinking isn't just for show. It's a look into how life forces us to change, often against our will. Childhood, adolescence, adulthood. We stretch and shrink to fit the world around us, sometimes feeling too big, sometimes too small, and rarely just right. Life doesn't ask for permission. It transforms us whether we're ready or not. Even as he speaks, he sits atop a mushroom, a symbol of experimentation, transformation, and balance. But here's the irony. The caterpillar asks Alice who she is, while he too is in the middle of a transformation. Soon, he'll shed his form and become something completely new. In many ways, he's telling Alice that it's okay not to have all the answers, because change is inevitable. Alice is navigating Wonderland and herself. In Wonderland, your survival depends on how well you can handle change. And sometimes, the answer to who are you isn't as simple as we want it to be. When Alice finds herself lost, she turns to the Cheshire Cat, who gives her directions without really giving her any answers. "It doesn't much matter which way you go," he says. But that's the trick, isn't it? In Wonderland, the destination often matters less than the journey and who you become along the way. The Cheshire Cat is a symbol of perspective. He exists between presence and absence, appearing only when he wants to and fading just as quickly. In some ways, he represents how fleeting certainty can be. Just when you think you understand the world, the rules change, and all you're left with is what you thought you knew. The cat's cryptic advice may seem like a dismissal, but it reflects a profound truth. When you're in an unpredictable world, sometimes the act of choosing matters more than the outcome. So why did Lewis Carroll choose a cat? Some scholars believe it's a reference to the saying, "grinning like a Cheshire cat," which was a common phrase in Carroll's time. Cats are also notoriously independent creatures. The Cheshire Cat doesn't fawn over Alice or try to control her. Instead, it appears and disappears on its own terms, offering guidance but never attachment. Just when you think you understand something, it slips right through your fingers. Unlike the Queen of Hearts, who enforces control through fear, or the Hatter, who is trapped by time, the Cheshire Cat seems at peace with chaos. It chooses when and where it exists, floating between presence and absence. Some interpret the cat as representing self-awareness, acknowledging the madness of the world without being consumed by it. The cat's most famous line, "We're all mad here," sounds absurd at first, but it's one of the most profound things anyone says to Alice. In Wonderland, madness is the default. But madness, as the cat suggests, isn't always a flaw. It can be a form of freedom, a way of stepping outside the constraints of logic and control. The Cheshire Cat's ambiguity is its greatest strength. It doesn't give Alice clear answers because Wonderland is a world where you have to figure things out for yourself. It's a world of change, identity, and choice. The Cheshire Cat isn't trying to confuse Alice. He's teaching her that, sometimes, the only way forward is through. In Wonderland, chaos reigns supreme. Every character drifts through disorder in a world that refuses to make sense. Take the Mad Hatter, for instance. His tea party is stuck in time, a never-ending loop of nonsense where the only certainty is uncertainty. Time condemned the Hatter to an endless tea time frozen at 6 o'clock. The phrase "mad as a hatter" wasn't a joke. It was a real-life tragedy. In Victorian England, hat makers were exposed to mercury during the production process, a toxin that slowly poisoned their minds. Tremors, paranoia, and hallucinations became their reality. The Mad Hatter is a reflection of an industry that turned people into shadows of themselves. The clock never moves because when you're mad, time stops making sense altogether. The tea party feels playful at first, but look closer. It's a haunting metaphor for being trapped in time. The tea never runs out, the conversation never progresses, and the clock is broken. It's chaos disguised as routine. In Wonderland, madness is the endless repetition of the same moment over and over until time itself stops making sense. The Mad Hatter's rebellion is his refusal to play by the rules of normalcy. If the world demands order, he answers with nonsense. His tea party is a protest. But there's something tragic in this endless game, because while the tea party seems like freedom, it's really a trap. Moving in circles, never actually going anywhere, and never escaping. His madness may symbolize rebellion against societal norms, where he embraces absurdity rather than order. The Mad Hatter's tea party is a symbol of how we all try to make sense of a chaotic world. Some of us cling to routines thinking they'll bring order, but others, like the Hatter, just let time slip away entirely. And in Wonderland, perhaps the real tragedy is realizing that no matter what you do, whether you fight it or ignore it, time keeps moving, and time always wins. If Wonderland had a pulse, it would beat as erratically as the March Hare, a jittery fragment of a creature consumed by nervous energy. Alice stumbles upon the March Hare's tea party, a scene that looks ordinary at first, but quickly unravels into chaos. The March Hare invites Alice to sit, but his hospitality is as erratic as his behavior. His mind is stuck in a permanent frenzy, unable to slow down. He represents the fear of collapse, the moment where the last thread holding your sanity together finally snaps. In this world, nothing is predictable, and that's the point. The phrase "mad as a March hare" came from real life. Hares in March, during their breeding season, are known for their erratic, almost frenzied behavior, leaping, boxing, and jittering as if the world itself has spun out of control. Wonderland is a reflection of what happens when the world stops making sense. The real madness isn't in the Hatter, the Hare, or the Queen. It's in the fear that we might wake up one day and find ourselves lost in a story where we don't recognize who we are anymore. In Wonderland, The true terror isn't the chaos. It's the slow, creeping realization that maybe you belong there. Madness, identity, control. Wonderland is a mirror reflecting our deepest fears. The fear of losing ourselves, of becoming something we don't understand. And maybe, just maybe, Wonderland wasn't a dream at all. It was a warning. The March Hare's world runs on broken time, stuck in an endless tea party where progress is impossible. A world that demands us to adapt, but never allows us to truly move forward. Then there's the Queen of Hearts, ruling not with justice, but with rage. She doesn't demand loyalty, she demands fear. And yet, her commands are so senseless that they become almost laughable. She's a parody of power, a critique of leaders who rule not with wisdom, but with terror. Her famous cry of "off with their heads" shows just how fragile that kind of power is. Her rule shows that there's no order, only chaos pretending to be in control. Her kingdom is a facade, a chaotic masquerade where fear holds everything together by a thread. But fear isn't as strong as it seems. It cracks under pressure. And the louder she shouts, the more obvious it becomes. Her power isn't real, it's fragile. The Queen of Hearts demands obedience, but she offers nothing in return. Not safety, not fairness, not purpose. Her reign is built on fear alone. And fear might keep people in line for a while, but it can never build a thriving kingdom. She represents leaders, real or imagined, who lose themselves in their need for control, power, and authority. The Queen of Hearts may seem larger than life, but she's small, trapped in her own endless tantrum. And like a house of cards, she's fragile, destined to collapse the moment someone questions her. In Victorian times, a house of cards was already a familiar phrase, a symbol of something grand, but dangerously unstable. And Carroll's Queen of Hearts embodies that perfectly, a ruler whose authority is a facade. Her entire world is for show, balancing on fragile traditions and nonsense rules. But Carroll wasn't just telling a story. He was holding up a mirror to systems of power in his own time. Her card soldiers and the obsession with appearances like painting roses show that everything in her kingdom is about superficial control rather than real power. Just like a literal house of cards, it only stands because everyone plays along out of fear. In the Queen's kingdom, even the games are absurd. In Chapter 8 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, the Queen of Hearts invites Alice to a game of croquet. But it's not the game you'd expect. The mallets, flamingos, the balls, hedgehogs, and the wickets. Soldiers bent into awkward arches. The entire scene is pure chaos. There are no rules, no order, just the Queen shouting commands and threatening to behead anyone who frustrates her. The game is less about skill and more about survival. Everyone just plays along, pretending this madness is normal. The Queen's croquet game is bizarre, but shows how fragile her authority really is. The players aren't following her rules because they respect her. They're obeying out of fear. The croquet game symbolizes the chaos of trying to fit into a world where the systems of power like the Queen of Hearts are unjust, inconsistent, and absurd. It's a critique of systems that demand obedience while constantly changing the rules to suit those in power. In Victorian England, where propriety, rationality, and control were paramount, few things were feared more than being labeled mad, a diagnosis that often led to lifelong social exile. there was a strong belief that madness could run in families, and it was seen as a shameful condition that could ruin an entire family's reputation. Mental illness was feared because it carried an overwhelming stigma. Unlike physical ailments, madness was thought to result in unpredictable behavior, making those afflicted seem dangerous or embarrassing. Asylums were built as much to protect society from the mentally ill as they were for treatment. Mental asylums in Victorian England were grim places. Those who entered rarely left. People with illnesses that today might be understood and treated were labeled as lunatics and locked away. To be declared mad was to be cast out from the world. A living ghost hidden behind walls society didn't want to look at. In Alice in Wonderland, we see disorientation, confusion, and fear. Alice falls into a world where the rules no longer make sense, where time is meaningless and language unravels into nonsense. Some historians believe that Wonderland was a metaphor for the terrifying loss of control that came with mental illness. Victorian society thrived on appearances and control. But beneath the polished surface of tea parties and parlors was an undercurrent of fear. Fear of what couldn't be controlled. Alice's fall into Wonderland is a reflection of that cultural fear, the fear of being lost, forgotten, or dismissed as mad. Alice's journey begins with curiosity, but it quickly becomes something else, a test. She's no longer in a world of comfort and familiarity. She's fallen into chaos, and the question remains, is she giving up control or desperately trying to keep it? Alice, a young girl full of wonder and curiosity, falls into a world that doesn't make sense. A world where nothing is stable, where logic unravels, and where rules seem designed to confuse, not guide. Many theorists see Wonderland as a metaphor for the end of youthful wonder and the inevitable confrontation with the reality of growing up. It's not just a fall down a rabbit hole. It's a descent into the terrifying realization that childhood can't last forever. But what if Wonderland isn't just a dream? What if it's a reflection of the way society tries to control us, to force us into roles that don't fit? Alice is constantly told who she should be, what she should do, and where she belongs. But none of it feels right. Every locked door, every command, every bizarre rule in Wonderland is a reflection of the pressures of life. To follow paths we didn't choose, to be small when the world told us we are, and to be silent when we want to speak. Alice's journey through Wonderland is about reclaiming her power and that she controls the narrative. She learns that she doesn't have to play by the rules of a world that doesn't make sense. By the end of her journey, Alice isn't the same girl who fell down the rabbit hole. Wonderland tried to change her, to confuse her, to make her small. But instead, it forced her to realize something, that the world will always try to tell you who you are. Her tale has survived for over a century because it taps into something universal. The fear of losing yourself in a world that doesn't make sense. In the end, Wonderland isn't just a faraway place. It's a mirror, a reflection of everything you carry inside. Your fears, your hopes, your doubts. And what you see looking back at you depends on who you are when you fall down the rabbit hole. Whether Wonderland is a dream, a nightmare, or something in between, one thing is certain. It changes you. It pushes you, tests you, forces you to ask the questions you've been too afraid to face. Who am I? Why am I here? What do I do next?
That depends a good deal on where you want to get to.
Thank you for joining me for this story. Until next time, stay mystical. Congratulations on making it this far down the rabbit hole. If you've enjoyed the journey, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to become part of our growing community of Mystic Seekers. Which Wonderland character do you relate to the most? And if you could step into Wonderland, which scene would it be? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.